The sun beat down on Red Hollow, a rough little frontier settlement where justice was traded like cattle, and mercy was as scarce as rain. Dust rolled across the ground in gritty gusts as townsfolk gathered near the wooden auction block, half out of boredom, half out of cruelty. The sheriff stood front and center, puffing his chest like a rooster who controlled more land than he truly did. His badge was tarnished, his boots scuffed, and his hands smelled of whiskey. Yet he smirked with the full confidence of a man who believed no one would challenge him. At the edge of the platform stood Clara Mayfield, a young widow with hair that used to shine like river gold but now clung to her face in exhausted strands. She wore the same dress she'd sewn 6 months ago, before her husband died, before the debts rolled in, before her world collapsed beneath her boots. But even worse than the hunger, the fear or the humiliation was the tiny, desperate cry coming from her arms. Luke, her newborn son, clung to her breast, his small fingers gripping her torn shawl. He was only a month old, born the night a storm rattled the shingles off their roof and the midwife arrived too late. Clara had delivered him alone, shaky and terrified, whispering prayers into his downy hair. She had never imagined that so soon she would stand on a block like livestock, holding the only thing left that gave her a reason to breathe. Around her, men muttered darkly, "Pretty enough for a house girl. Worth maybe $2 if the baby's thrown in. Nah, sell the kid separate. Wet nurse can take him." Clara's stomach twisted. "No, not my son. Not him. Take me, sell me, just let him stay with me." But the sheriff's voice boomed over the jeers. "Boys, we're starting the auction. Widow Mayfield here owes fines to the settlement. Can't pay? Then she works. And as for the kid," he paused deliberately, letting the tension tighten like a noose, "the infant may be sold separately if someone makes a fair bid." Clara felt her knees buckle. She tightened her hold on Luke until he whimpered. "Please," she whispered, "don't take him. I'll work. I'll do anything. Just don't take my baby." But mercy wasn't something men like the sheriff carried. He raised his hand. "Start the bidding." Voices rose. A rancher shouted a price she barely heard over the pounding in her ears. Another man waved a coin, laughing loudly as if buying a mother was nothing more than entertainment. The world blurred. Luke cried harder, rooting at her breast, his hunger sharp enough to cut her heart open. Clara's milk was almost gone. She'd eaten only stale bread for 2 days. Her arms trembled from exhaustion, but she used every bit of strength she had left to keep him pressed against her. $2. $2.50. Split 'em, baby, first. That last shout made Clara's vision darken around the edges. "No," she cried, voice cracking like a dry branch. "Please," but the sheriff smirked. "Separate bids are allowed if—" He never finished, because the crowd suddenly quieted. Like the wind holding its breath, a shadow fell across the dust. A tall figure stepped between the men, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing worn moccasins and a long dark braid bound with leather. His features were sharp, proud, unmistakably Apache. His presence alone made the men closest to him step back without a word. His name, though no one yet dared speak it aloud, was Nanton, a man known in whispers as someone who rode with calm confidence and fought only when his people were threatened. He approached the platform slowly, each step quiet but impossibly steady, as if he walked with the weight of generations behind him. When he stopped, he lifted his chin and said a single sentence, firm as bedrock, "I'll take them both." Silence. Then someone snorted, "The baby don't need to go with her." Nanton's eyes narrowed. The only flash of emotion he allowed. His voice dropped into a quiet growl, dangerous in its calm. "No one divides a mother from her child." The sheriff swallowed. Clara's breath caught. Luke's cries softened, as if even he sensed the shift in the air. No man dared argue again. At that moment, dust swirling, sun burning. The whole crowd frozen. Clara felt something she hadn't felt since the night her husband died. Hope, small, fragile, but real. And as Nanton stepped closer, offering his hand, Clara clutched Luke tighter and realized her life had changed forever. The sheriff counted the coins with shaking fingers, muttering curses he didn't dare say aloud. Nanton stood unmoving, watching him with the patient stillness of a hawk perched on a canyon ledge. When the last coin clinked into the sheriff's hand, the Apache warrior finally turned toward Clara. She tensed, not out of fear, but out of confusion. Who was he? Why would a man risk trouble from the entire settlement for a woman he'd never seen before? Nanton didn't speak. He simply extended an arm to help her down from the auction block. Clara's legs nearly collapsed under her, but he steadied her with a touch so gentle she hardly felt it. Luke stirred weakly in her arms, his little face scrunched with hunger. His cries had softened to thin, tired whimpers. "You cannot walk far with the baby," Nanton said quietly. "I have a horse." His voice was deep, steady, and so surprisingly calm that Clara blinked in confusion. She had braced herself for harshness, orders, demands, some claim of ownership. After all, the sheriff had sold her like an object. But the Apache spoke as if she had a choice. Where are you taking me?" Clara asked, her throat dry. "Home," he said simply. That word home made her flinch. She hadn't had one in months. He helped her onto his horse, lifting her with the care of a man holding something fragile and priceless. Clara had ridden before, but never with a newborn in her arms. And certainly never with a warrior she didn't know sitting so close behind her. When he mounted, his body heat spread through her back like a quiet shield. He didn't touch her more than necessary, just an arm to keep her steady and ensure the baby wouldn't fall. "Hold your child close," he murmured. "The trail will be rough." Clara nodded, pressing Luke tightly against her chest. His little mouth rooted instinctively at her blouse, searching for milk she barely had left. Her pride burned with helplessness. Nanton nudged the horse forward, guiding them out of Red Hollow. No one moved to stop him. No one dared. The townsfolk parted like dry grass before a fire. As they left the settlement behind, Clara felt the weight of fear lifting and the weight of uncertainty settling in its place. The prairies stretched wide before them, the horizon trembling in the heat. A hawk circled above, crying into the open sky. For a long time they rode in silence except for the soft jingle of tack and Luke's quiet whimpers. Finally, Clara whispered, "I don't understand why you did it." "You were in danger," Nanton said. "So was the child. The sheriff's men would have taken him." Clara's breath shuddered. "I know. You also have not eaten enough to feed him." Nanton reached into a small saddlebag. "This will help." He handed her a small pouch of dried leaves. They smelled faintly sweet like wild mint mixed with something floral. "What is it?" "Tea for nursing mothers. It is what our women drink when they need strength. Drink it when we stop." Clara stared down at the pouch, struck speechless. Kindness was not something she expected, not from anyone, least of all a stranger. "You know about babies?" she asked softly. "A little." Nanton's voice warmed almost imperceptibly. "I have nieces and nephews who scream loud enough to shake the mountains." Clara couldn't help the tiny, tired laugh that slipped out. Luke whimpered again, pressing his face into her chest. "We will stop soon," Nanton said. "He is hungry, and so are you." They halted by a small creek shaded with cottonwoods. Clara slid off the horse, legs shaky but heart unexpectedly steady. Nanton knelt by the water, filling a cup for her to drink. He stayed at a respectful distance while she nursed Luke, never turning to stare or intrude. She watched him from the corner of her eye. The way he moved calm, deliberate, always aware of his surroundings, spoke of a man used to danger. But the way he poured water for her, checked the horse's hooves, and ensured shade for the baby spoke of someone who chose gentleness whenever he could. "Why help me?" she finally asked. Nanton looked at her for a long moment, the wind stirring his dark hair. "In my people," he said, "a mother is sacred. Anyone who harms one loses honor." His gaze dropped to Luke, "And a child without protection is like a fawn in the open. I could not leave you there." Clara felt something swell in her chest, something warmer than fear, deeper than gratitude. It was trust. New, fragile, and unsteady, but growing. She cradled Luke tighter, watching Nanton quietly pack their things for the next stretch of the journey. For the first time since her husband died, she felt she was heading somewhere safer, not deeper into danger, somewhere she and her son might rest, somewhere they might heal, somewhere that, maybe, just maybe, they might truly belong. The trail climbed gradually, leaving the arid plains of Red Hollow behind and bringing them into the rugged hills where the forests grew thicker and the streams ran clearer. Clara had never traveled so far from her town or from the rules, expectations, and judgments that had haunted her every day. Now, riding beside Nanton, she felt as if she had stepped into another world entirely. Finally, after hours that stretched like days, they approached a cluster of adobe homes nestled among towering pines. Smoke spiraled from a communal fire, carrying the scent of dried herbs and roasting venison. Children ran barefoot between the houses, laughing and chasing one another, their voices ringing freely without the constant echo of judgment or cruelty that Clara had grown used to. Women tended gardens, milking goats and kneading dough, while men repaired tools or sharpened weapons. Clara's heart pounded. She had expected hostility. She had expected suspicion or fear. Yet the people here, the Apache, merely paused to watch as Nanton led her and Luke down from the horses. "This is our home," Nanton said softly, though there was no need for words. His posture, protective but calm, explained everything. They were safe here. Still, Clara's steps faltered. She felt the weight of shame heavy on her shoulders. Her dress was tattered. Her hair was matted. She smelled of dust and sweat. "I am not one of them. I am nothing but a failure." She held Luke closer, praying he wouldn't sense her fear. A woman stepped forward, her eyes sharp but welcoming. "Nanton brings strangers sometimes," she said in soft tones. "But you," she glanced at Clara's worn face, then at the baby, "you are weary, and the child is hungry. Come, sit, eat." Clara's hand shook as she accepted the offering of roasted corn and warm water. She had never felt such generosity without expectation of payment or control. Around her, women gathered quietly, murmuring to each other in their language but glancing at her with curious but non-judgmental eyes. One of the older women approached, placing her hand gently on Clara's arm. "You are safe. That is all that matters now." Clara blinked back tears. Safety had been a stranger to her for months. The kind words were like sunlight through clouds, warming something long frozen inside her. Nanton knelt beside her, silently observing, as if to ensure that nothing could harm them. He didn't speak unless necessary, but every glance and gesture showed Clara a respect she had never known. Here, she was not property, not a debt, not a failure. She was simply a mother, and that alone demanded protection. Over the following days, Clara was introduced to the daily rhythms of the village. She learned to fetch water from the stream with children bounding alongside her. She helped women grind corn and learned the careful way they preserved herbs for medicine. Every day she marveled at the cooperative spirit. The Apache raised their children collectively, and no mother was expected to fend alone. Yet even in this welcoming environment, Clara struggled with her own pride. She was unused to being treated as equal. She feared that she would never belong. Each evening, she would cradle Luke and watch Nanton from afar as he trained young boys with bows, his calm authority commanding respect without cruelty. One night, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky crimson, Nanton approached her. "You have strength," he said quietly. "More than you know. Strength is not the work you carry. It is the way you survive, the way you protect this child. That is courage." Clara felt a swell in her chest. "Courage," she whispered, tasting the word. It was foreign but comforting, a reminder that perhaps she had not been as broken as she feared as the weeks passed. Clara observed how the Apache treated one another with care, with accountability, with shared responsibility. She realized that here, a mother's worth was never measured in dollars or labor alone. She was valued for her love, her protection of her child, and her willingness to endure. Luke began to thrive too. His cries became laughter. His small fingers curled confidently around hers. The village embraced him as part of the community. Clara noticed, for the first time, a glimmer of hope that life could be more than survival, it could be joy. Yet she could not forget the world outside, the one she had left behind in Red Hollow. The townsfolk had been cruel and greedy. She knew they would not simply let her go. Danger might still come, but for the first time, Clara understood that she had allies. Nanton was not only her protector, but a man whose honor was unshakable. The women of the village offered guidance, teaching her that survival was strengthened by community. And slowly, ever so slowly, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future where she and her son were more than victims. They could be part of something enduring, something real. That night, as the firelight flickered across the adobe walls and Luke slept soundly in her arms, Clara whispered a promise to herself. She would learn their ways, honor their culture, and become part of this community, no matter what lay ahead. And somewhere deep inside, she allowed herself to hope for the first time in months that maybe, just maybe, they could be truly free. Clara had begun to feel the rhythm of life in the village, the comforting routine of chores, meals, and laughter echoing around her. She had learned the names of the women and children, recognized the herbs that healed scrapes and colds, and even managed to teach Luke a few simple gestures, delighting the other children with his tiny laughter. For a brief, golden moment, she allowed herself to believe that the world beyond these hills had no power over them, but the frontier never allowed. Illusions of safety. One early morning, just as the sun painted the hills gold, a distant sound drifted through the valley, the unmistakable clatter of hooves over rocky terrain. Clara froze mid-step, Luke in her arms, the small bundle squirming as if sensing her sudden tension. Nanton, seated beside the communal fire, stood instantly, muscles coiling like a spring ready to release. "They're coming," he said quietly, his eyes narrowing. "From Red Hollow." Clara's stomach dropped. She knew what this meant. The auction, the sheriff, the men who had bid on her as if she were cattle, they had not forgotten. And neither would they forgive. A posse of men emerged from the trail, mounted and grim-faced, rifles slung across their shoulders. At their front rode the town sheriff, still wearing his cracked badge, his eyes fixed on Clara with a possessive hunger that made her skin crawl. Behind him, a few other men whispered among themselves, their intentions clear. They intended to take Luke and perhaps her back to Red Hollow. No matter what, Clara's heart raced. She pressed Luke closer to her chest. "Nanton, what can we do?" she asked, voice trembling. He laid a calm hand on hers, the kind that steadied her fear without dismissing it. "We do not run. We do not fight blindly. We speak first. Then we show them the truth." The posse rode to the edge of the village, stopping just short of the adobe homes. Nanton stepped forward, flanked by his warriors, their silhouettes imposing yet measured. Clara stayed behind, clutching Luke, watching the exchange like a spectator to her own fate. The sheriff dismounted, his boots kicking up dust. "That child belongs to Red Hollow," he barked. "And so does the woman who birthed him. You can't claim him." Nanton's gaze was steady, unflinching. The child was being sold illegally. She was being taken against her will. Your laws do not justify cruelty. Step forward if you wish to argue further. The sheriff sputtered, anger and disbelief battling for dominance on his face. "You're just an Apache. This is our settlement." Nanton's voice was low, resonant, carrying the weight of authority and honor. "I will not let a child be taken from his mother. That is not a choice you may make." A tense silence followed. Clara felt her pulse hammering in her ears. Then, slowly, some of the townsfolk men who had known her since childhood stepped back. Murmurs of doubt and shame rippled through the posse. The sheriff's confidence faltered. Clara, gathering courage from the strength of Nanton's calmness, stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but it carried over the dust and tension. "I choose to stay with the man who saved my child's life," she said. "He did not buy me. He rescued us. I will not go back to a town that would tear my son from my arms." The posse looked shocked. No one had expected her to speak. The sheriff's face twisted in rage. But Nanton's warriors remained immovable, silent, their presence enough to challenge any notion of force. After a long, tense moment, the sheriff muttered curses under his breath and signaled his men. One by one, the posse turned their horses and retreated, leaving the village in uneasy silence. Clara sank to the ground, still clutching Luke, tears running freely. Nanton knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You are safe now," he said quietly. "They will not return. Not while we stand together." Clara looked around at the faces of the villagers, at the children peeking curiously from behind adobe walls, at the women offering gentle smiles. She realized for the first time that she had allies, protectors, and a community willing to uphold justice even when the world outside did not. That night, as the sun set and the hills glowed with amber firelight, Clara held Luke close. She whispered a promise, both to him and herself. No matter what storms came from beyond, no one would divide them again. And somewhere in the quiet, Nanton watched them from the shadows, vigilant but unintrusive. A guardian whose honor now bound their fates together. For the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to breathe. Danger had come, yes, but so had the courage to face it. And in that Korag, the night after the posse's retreat, the village seemed almost to hold its breath. Fires burned low, casting flickering shadows across the adobe walls. Children slept snugly under blankets woven by their mothers. The air smelled of pine and dried herbs, carrying the soft chorus of crickets and distant streams. Clara sat outside her small shelter, cradling Luke against her chest. His tiny hands fisted her blouse, his eyes half-lidded in exhaustion. She had expected to feel relief. After all, the danger from Red Hollow had passed, but instead, she felt the weight of a different kind, the burden of choice. The frontier had given her little opportunity to act for herself. Her husband had died, her debts had crushed her, and the auction had threatened to strip her of everything she loved. For months, survival had been her only decision. Now, for the first time, she could choose her path. Nanton approached quietly, moving like the shadows themselves. He did not startle her. She was used to his silent presence, a calm anchor in a world of chaos. He knelt beside her, resting one hand lightly on the ground while his eyes met hers. "You do not need to answer now," he said softly. "Tomorrow, the path will be yours to choose." Clara's voice trembled when she spoke. "I have lived all my life following the choices of others, my husband, my debts. The sheriff. Now you've brought me here, to a place where I am safe, where my son is safe. And yet, I am afraid. Fear is not shame, Nanton said gently. It is only the shadow of what is unknown. You do not walk this path alone. You never have to. She looked down at Luke, sleeping fitfully against her chest. The warmth of his small body reminded her of why she had survived so far, not for herself, but for him. The thought of returning to Red Hollow, or to any life where she and Luke could be torn apart again, made her stomach churn. Could I stay here? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Nanton's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, but remained steady. You are welcome. If you choose, this can be your home. You, your son, with us? The words were simple, yet they carried weight heavier than any gold she had ever imagined. A home, safety, acceptance, and more than that, a man who respected her, protected her, and treated her as more than a commodity. Tears ran freely down her cheeks. I never thought I would have a choice again. I never thought I would have. Hope. You have both, Nanton said. And I will not leave you to the mercy of others. You will not have to survive alone anymore. She inhaled deeply, feeling the first stirrings of courage since her husband's death. Then I choose to stay. I choose to stay with you and with the people who have given us safety. Nanton's lips curved in the smallest hint of a smile. And for a moment, Clara could see the man behind the warrior, the one capable of tenderness and trust. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, careful not to startle her. Then we will build a life together, he said quietly. You and Luke with me and my people. Families belong together. That is the law we follow. The village elders, who had watched the exchange from a distance, nodded subtly, a silent blessing. Clara felt a sense of belonging she had never known. Not just protection, but acceptance, honor, and respect. Over the following days, Clara began to integrate herself fully into village life. She learned the language, helping the children with their small lessons and teaching Luke new words. She learned to cook traditional meals, to tend the gardens, and to gather herbs for medicine. Nanton remained nearby, never hovering, always patient, allowing her to grow into her role at her own pace. At night, as she held Luke close and watched the stars stretch across the sky, she whispered to him, "This is our home now. This is our family, and no one can ever take us apart again." Nanton watched from the shadows, silently promising that he would never allow it. Their bond was no longer just survival, it was choice, respect, and love, forged in the fires of hardship and solidified in the warmth of trust. Clara had survived the frontier. She had protected her child. And now, for the first time in her life, she was free to love, to nurture, and to hope for a future that belonged to her and her son alone. Spring had begun to touch the mountains, bringing bursts of green to the hillsides and wildflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. The village, nestled among the pines, thrummed with life and laughter. Birds called from the treetops, children ran barefoot along the dusty paths, and the scent of fresh bread mingled with the earthy aroma of the forest. For Clara, every sound and every sight was a reminder that she and Luke were finally safe. The days had passed in a rhythm she had never known, the sun rising on a quiet home, the evening spent with firelight casting shadows across adobe walls. Clara had learned the customs and routines of the Apache, yet she brought pieces of her own past into this new life. Songs her mother had sung, stories of frontier hardships, and lessons in reading and writing. In return, she absorbed the wisdom of the tribe, learning which herbs healed fever, how to track deer without disturbing the land, and the sacred importance of family. Luke thrived in the warmth of this community. His laughter was infectious, and the other children adored him. He followed the women to gather eggs, toddled after the boys as they practiced archery, and learned early the lessons of respect and courage that Nanton embodied. Clara watched him each day, her heart swelling with a joy she had thought impossible just months before. Yet it was not only Luke who grew. Clara herself had changed. Gone was the fear that had haunted her from the auction block, replaced with confidence and a sense of belonging. She no longer felt like a shadow of herself, barely surviving. She had become a woman with strength, purpose, and a place in a community that valued her. One afternoon, under the shade of a wide cottonwood, Nanton approached. Clara looked up from helping Luke tie a bundle of firewood and felt a flutter of anticipation in her chest. Nanton knelt before her, his dark eyes serious yet warm, his posture respectful yet commanding. "Clara," he began, "you have chosen to stay with us. You and your son are part of this family now. But there is another path we may take, a path that honors our bond and ensures that Luke grows knowing both our names." Clara's pulse quickened. She understood what he meant. A union between them would solidify not just protection, but love, and symbolize the blending of two worlds, hers and his. I would like that," she whispered, her voice trembling with happiness. "I want to build a life here, with you, with Luke, with your people." Nanton reached for her hand, warm and steady, his grip gentle but unyielding. "Then we shall honor this with a ceremony," he said. "A union not of convenience, but of choice, trust, and love. You have been through much, Clara, yet you have emerged stronger than most could ever hope. You deserve a life of joy." That evening, under a sky ablaze with the colors of sunset, the village gathered. The ceremony was simple yet profound. A circle of family, the elders blessing their union, and the children standing nearby, eager to witness the promise of protection and love. Clara and Nanton exchanged words in their shared languages, their vows carrying the weight of survival, respect, and devotion. Luke, perched on Clara's hip, reached for Nanton's hand, his small fingers curling around the warrior's. Nanton lifted him gently, holding him between them. In that moment, they were not just mother, father, and son, they were a family united, unbreakable. The celebration continued with laughter, food, and music. Clara danced alongside the women, teaching them a few songs from her own heritage, while the children joined in playful games. Nanton watched, a faint smile on his lips, his eyes never leaving Clara and Luke. He had promised to protect them, but now he realized that he had gained something equally precious. Love and trust in return. As night fell and the stars blanketed the sky, Clara held Luke close by the fire. She whispered to him softly, feeling the warmth of his small body and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "You were saved the day a brave man refused to let us be torn apart," she murmured. "And now we belong together forever." Nanton sat beside her, silently placing an arm around both mother and child. The past Red Hollow, the auction, the fear and desperation was gone. In its place was a life rooted in trust, community, and love. They had endured the harshness of the frontier and emerged not just alive, but thriving, united in heart and spirit. For Clara, Luke, and Nanton, the mountains, rivers, and skies were no longer symbols of danger, they were the backdrop of a new beginning. A life where safety, love, and family were no longer dreams, but reality. And in that quiet, starlit night, she knew this was home.